In my earlier video on the subject of the Hitler Diaries, I looked at what happened to what Hitler said that he had left for posterity and how 10 trunks of something went up in smoke in the Heidenholt forest to the south of Boernersdorf in Saxon Switzerland, Germany. Or, if you prefer alternative history, how 10 trunks of Hitler memorabilia did not go up in smoke. Whatever may have happened in the Heidenholt forest in the early morning of the 21st of April 1945, that left what Hitler possessed in Berlin and Berchtesgaden. As far as this story is concerned, the fate of Hitler's possessions became important after the war because of the huge interest in Nazi-era memorabilia for collectors and others. 2 days after his 56th birthday, Hitler finally admitted that the war was lost. I think everyone who's listening to me now has seen the film Downfall, and you'll know the scene where Hitler says, "That's it," and he's going to go off and kill himself. What happened next is that Goebbels rushed over to him and gave what David Irving described as the best speech of Goebbels' life to an audience of one. In doing so, Goebbels convinced Hitler not to commit suicide, and in exchange for giving Hitler another 200 or so hours of life, he condemned tens of thousands of people who were to be killed in the last days of the war. Nonetheless, even though Hitler did not put a round through his skull, there was still the question of what he was going to leave for posterity. In his bedroom in the bunker, he had a large safe measuring around 120 by 90 centimeters. At about 1600 hours on the 22nd of April 1945, he summoned his adjutant, Julius Schaub, a man who had been at his side since the early days in the 1920s in Munich, and requested that he dispose of his private property. The safe was full of papers which were crammed into suitcases, carried up into the Chancery Garden, tipped into a bomb crater and set on fire. In the meantime, Hitler must have told Eva Braun that Schaub was to travel south, and she wrote a farewell letter to her sister with requests as to what to do with what she was leaving behind. This is portrayed very well in the film Downfall. In my opinion, the juxtaposition of an impotent Hitler watching his papers being burned and that of Eva Braun typing a letter is a cinematic masterpiece. As far as our story is concerned, there is a mention of Gundelfinger's plane in Eva Braun's letter. "Did Aunt arrive with the letter and suitcase?" she asked. "We heard here only that the plane had been attacked." As Hitler contemplated his life going up in smoke and to the backdrop of Soviet artillery, he is said to have said that he'd lost his dearest memories. "But what's the point?" he added. "Sooner or later you've got to get rid of all that stuff." To complete this task, Hitler instructed Schaub to fly to Berchtesgaden and destroy all his remaining personal files. Schaub turned up at Hitler's house, the Berghof at Obersalzberg above Berchtesgaden, with Hitler's front door key late on the 26th of April 1945. He was under the spell of alcohol, and he had a young lady he was not married to with him. The previous day, the RAF had popped by with 300 bombers and had unfortunately not tidied up after their visit. As well as smashing up the homes of Bormann and Goering, part of Hitler's home had also been hit. Gretel Braun, the sister of Eva Braun and wife of Hermann Fegelein, found him inside Hitler's private rooms with his lady friend. Gretel Braun did not see what the two of them got up to inside, as Schaub had given Gretel a letter from his sister and she was too busy reading that. Schaub had been instructed to destroy everything, but Gretel told an American undercover agent a few months after the war that in her opinion, Schaub probably selected the most interesting things with the help of his mistress and then hid them away. It needs to be pointed out the opinions of Schaub differ. Gretel Braun did not like him at all, whereas Traudl Junge thought of him as being quiet and likeable. It was rumoured that some of Hitler's papers ended up in the hands of a local official. If so, then they might yet turn up. The SS and Nazi officials who had terrorized the inhabitants of the Obersalzberg for the previous 10 years or so now showed them some mercy. Their instructions were to destroy Hitler's house, but the locals were given some time to carry off whatever they could beforehand. Thus, as what was left of the bodies of Blondie, Hitler and Eva Braun were being interred in the garden, the Obersalzberg locals were helping themselves to the crockery, cookware, curtains and linen from the Berghof. Some of Hitler's property was also hidden in a salt mine, such as his books. Once the time limit was over, the SS set the Berghof on fire. However, by the time the American French troops got there, there was still a lot of pickings to go around, and they helped themselves to everything they could. As far as this story is concerned, here is one account from an American GI who was at the Berghof souvenir hunting. "The next thing I picked up was a diary," he said. "It was a red diary with gold lettering and Hitler's initials were on it. But I flashed right through it and it was all in German. I just threw it right aside and it dropped into the water on the floor." He returned to retrieve it sometime later, but the diary, or whatever it was, had gone. The private correspondence between Hitler and Eva Braun was saved, as were some of his drawings, the trousers he'd been wearing on the 20th of July 1944 when Colonel von Stauffenberg's bomb went off, as well as all sorts of other material. They were taken to an SS unit at Schloss Fischhorn near Zell am See, commanded by SS Hauptsturmführer Franz Conrad. The instructions were to burn it to prevent its contents falling into Allied hands. Conrad had participated in the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto. His photograph appears in the Stroop report. He was a thief and a plunderer. In a world of really unpleasant characters, he really stood out. On the 5th of May 1945, money was entrusted to him from the Reichsbank by Colonel Wilhelm Spatzel of the Reich Security Head Office to pay German soldiers, but he probably made off with that as well. He gave his secretary Martha von Boskowitz a package measuring around 45 by 15 by 10 centimeters and asked her to take care of it. In the middle of June 1945, a former SS man came to her and collected it. What was inside, no one knows. Franz also sent large quantities of foodstuffs as well as Hitler material to his brother's house in Schladming. Some of this material was found and confiscated in a raid on the 24th of August 1945, and more property was found in a raid on Franz's mother's home in October 1945. This was later shipped to the United States. Part of this property is the colour film you can see here, filmed by Eva Braun at the Berghof and other places, documenting her life and that of her family and friends amongst the elite of the Third Reich. However, large parts of this material have disappeared, although I suspect some will turn up in time, locked in somebody's attic. Colonel Wilhelm Spatzel of the Reich Security Head Office, RSHA, the man who had given Franz Conrad the money to pay the troops, remembered that Conrad said that he had a Hitler diary. It was written on very thin paper and was hidden in a specially made zinc box. Franz Conrad was later arrested, extradited to Poland and hanged in 1952. Under interrogation, he said that he knew nothing of a Hitler diary, but he admitted to taking Eva Braun's notebooks. There were rumours of a Hitler diary in a loose leaf file kept at the Berghof, although Gretel Braun said that there were minutes of the day's activities which were kept by whoever was the Führer's adjutant at the time. These were notes which were written down at the end of the day. So that is it as far as we know of Hitler's private possessions. Of course, Hitler gave a lot of stuff away, and there were paintings he did when he was living in Vienna as a young man, and no doubt all sorts of other stuff lying around as well. I presume that much of the material which survived is now held by private collectors who don't really want to show it to anyone outside of their immediate circle. To add a little story now from my own life, in October 2005, David Irving told me of a large collection of Hitler material that had turned up in West London. At the time, I was quite friendly with David Irving. I might do a video on that at some date in the future. So we went there to this place in West London, taking up a large part of the front room was a pile to what most people would have to be called junk. It looked a bit like a jumble sale. There were paintings, as you can see here, with the stamp of the Berghof and a glass case with all sorts of stuff inside, including what the owner claimed were Eva Braun's glasses. There was a huge Mein Kampf weighing, to my eye, around 8 to 10 kilos. It looked a bit like one of those decorated Bibles that used to be kept in the 19th century with clasps to hold it together. The owner was a particularly unpleasant character, aged probably in his 70s, but massively overweight and ill from diabetes and probably other ailments as well. He spoke in a very quiet voice, clearly unable to manage any louder. He had made a lot of money in some business venture in the 1960s and owned 2 houses which were side by side. His mother had been married to someone who'd been in the Leibstandarte SS in 1936. In the drive there was a 1970 registered Rolls-Royce. The photographs you can see here were taken by me, and unfortunately the equipment I had on me at the time was not as good as the equipment that I have now, so the quality is not very good. Of course, as far as all that stuff that was in there was concerned, I wouldn't know what was genuine and what wasn't, but on leaving, David Irving told me that in his opinion 90% of it probably was genuine. Normally in such cases one assumes that perhaps 10% will be genuine, the rest a forgery. I don't know what became of the collection. I suspect that a private collector bought it. I think the objective was he wanted to sell it off in parts to anybody who could be interested. And certainly the paintings and the Mein Kampf would have had some value. As David Irving was arrested the following month in Austria, then he probably was not kept in the loop as to what happened. However, after he was released, I asked him what had happened to the stuff, and he didn't know. The owner by this time was dead. This is an example of what could happen to the material from the Berghof. Now, so let's put all of these ingredients into the pot. There is the mystery of what happened to Hitler's private possessions, the huge interest in Hitler material from private collectors, laws in West Germany which pushed this type of material underground, and the mystery of what may or may not have been available in East Germany. That is to say that in the 1980s, a completely different situation existed to what exists today, and thus only adds to the mystery. Now, if I may conclude with the words of Robert Harris in his excellent book Selling Hitler, the film of which you can see here on YouTube, or rather it's a film adaptation, and Robert said this situation was a tantalizing state of affairs that was to provide the perfect scenario for forgery. Thanks for listening, and more will be revealed in part 3.